All right, kids, are you ready to hear a story? Yeah.
Welcome to Witch Toast and Other Tales. The Moonicorn, Part 3. The Moonicorn. Well, after Clive and Jed and Hank had a look at Betsy, and after more folk drove by Amos's farm and caught a sight of Betsy, the story started to spread all around town. A man from the newspaper, he came down and he said, "Hey, are you Mr. Jenkins?" And Amos said, "Yeah, that's me." He said, "Hey, I hear you've got this strange cow. Folks say it's got one horn coming out of its forehead. Kind of like a unicorn. They're calling it a moonicorn." And Amos was like, "Yep." And the newspaper man said, "Well, I'd like to do a story on it. Can I see her?" And Amos said, "Well, you're going to have to be careful. The last fella that tried pulled a bit too hard and got himself kicked. She may be a cow, but she's still a big animal and don't like being messed with." The man was like, "That's all right. I know a thing or two about cows. I was raised around here." And he saw Betsy and checked out her horn. He was real gentle. And then he went back and published his story in the newspaper. Moonicorn. Local cow grows silver horn. Now, people in town, once that newspaper story got published, they started coming out to look at Amos's cows. And Amos was out farming one day, and all of a sudden he saw a whole lot of folk coming. They walked right up to his fence. So he walked over and said, "Hey, what's this all about? Got a lot of work to do out here. What are you doing?" And they were like, the moonicorn. We want to see it." He was like, "What? Why?" And they said, "It's a cow with a horn on its head. We read about it in the newspaper." And he was like, "All right, look, you can stand there, I suppose, but you can't come onto my property. You stay right there on the other side of the fence. If she happens to come by, you can look at her." And they were like, all right. The next day, the same kind of folks showed up. Some other people showed up too, people with cameras. They said they were newspaper men from nearby towns, bigger towns. They read the news story and they wanted to come down and check out this so-called moonicorn. And Amos was like, "Look, we can't have all y'all coming up here and messing with my cow. She's a milk cow. She's a dairy cow. She makes milk. That's what she's here for, and I'm not going to let everybody go grabbing her horn and yanking on her and prodding her." And they're like, all right. But can we at least get a picture?" And he was like, "All right, but I got to be in it." Well, they published their stories, and the story got even bigger. And now some of the really big newspapers from some of the really big cities, they started writing articles about how there was this ridiculous hoax that all these country bumpkins believed. So they came down, and of course all the big newspaper men wanted to check her out for themselves. But Amos was like, "Look, I can't have everybody touching my cow. It's my cow. She's a working girl. She's a good girl. I don't know why that horn grew on her, but whatever it is, she does what she does, and I do what I do, and that's the way of it." So all the big city newspaper men huddled together for a bit, and they came back to him and said, "All right, what if we hired 3 experts, and we brought them down to have a look at her? Would it be all right then, just to confirm that it's real?" And Amos said, "All right, but only 3. So a couple of days later, the newspaper men came back, and they brought their 3 experts down with them. And there was a whole huge crowd of people now. People from the town, people from other towns, all the newspaper men from their town, all the newspaper men from the towns around them, and the big city newspaper men who kind of strutted around. In fact, there were so many people that even the sheriff came down to make sure folks didn't get too rowdy. So there they were. And of course, they all wanted to come onto his land, but Amos said, "No. You got to stay outside that fence. I won't have people messing with my cows. I take good care of my cow." Then they brought the 3 experts forward, and Amos let him in through the fence, then brought Betsy out. The first expert went up, circled around Betsy. He poked and prodded her and looked her all over. Then he touched the horn and felt around the base of it where it met her head. Then he gently pulled on it, and Betsy let out a moo. And the expert walked away, shaking his head. And the second expert went up. He circled around Betsy. He poked and prodded her and looked her all over. Then he touched the horn and felt around the base of it where it met her head. Then he gave it a firm pull, and Betsy let out 2 moos. Moo, moo. And the second expert walked away, shaking his head. And then the third expert went up. He circled around Betsy. He poked and prodded her and looked her all over. Then he touched the horn and felt around the base of it where it met her head. Then he gave it a hard pull, and Betsy let out 3 moos. Moo, moo, moo. And then there came to be a little light at the end of that unicorn horn. And then, cluck! Nobody was quite sure what happened, but all of a sudden that third expert was lying 10 feet away, flat on his back. He was like, oh. For a second, the crowd was silent, shocked. Somebody said, "She kicked him. Guess she had enough of being poked and prodded." And the crowd all laughed. And then the experts gathered together and they whispered quietly. And the next day, all the headlines read pretty much the same. Moonicorn baffles experts. That's the end of part 3. Find out what happens next in the Moonicorn, part 4. The Moonicorn, part 4. Moonicorn Madness. And now, people went totally crazy. All the hotels in town were full, and people were renting out any spare rooms they had, just because the asking price could be so ridiculously high, and people would still pay it. Now, Amos started to get a little nervous. People started calling him, offering to buy Betsy, and they offered him crazy amounts of money. It was like they were in a bidding war. The offers just kept getting higher and higher and higher, and he just kept saying no. He was like, "Listen, she's a dairy cow. She's a working animal. Had her many years. One night she grew a horn. So what? She's always done what she's supposed to do. She makes the milk. I always done what I'm supposed to do. I milk her. I sell the milk. I'm a dairy farmer. I'm not some freak show host, and I'm not looking to sell my cow." And Amos meant what he said. He could not abide by the thought of selling Betsy to some circus or carnival where she'd be paraded around in a cage all day, or selling her to some scientist or corporation where they'd poke her with needles and run who knows what kind of tests. Besides that, he was leery of all that money. He liked being a dairy farmer. He liked living in a small town. Here, he knew how to live and be happy, how to raise his kids up to be honest and capable and self-sufficient. That's what his father and grandfather did, and he turned out just fine. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Of course, him refusing to sell just made the story even bigger. And all day long, on any road that ran along his property line, there were people standing there, hoping to catch a glimpse of Betsy. Well, one night, a truck with its lights off drove along the road near Amos's backfield, and 2 shadows got out and climbed over the fence. It was a beautiful night. The weather was supposed to be great, and it was still summertime, so Amos had just let the cows stay out in the field. The 2 men approached Betsy, and one of them went right up to her and slipped a rope over her neck. He tried to lead her away, but she wouldn't move. She just stood there. So he pulled a little harder, and she mooed once. Moo. The other guy was like, "Let me try." He went up and grabbed hold of the rope and pulled harder and harder, till he was pulling as hard as he could, but she wouldn't move. Now Betsy moved twice. Moo, moo. The man said, "Larry, come help me with this." So the guy came up and they both grabbed the rope and they both started pulling as hard as they could to get her moving. And this time, Betsy moved once, moo, twice, moo, 3 times, moo. And there came to be a little light at the end of that silver horn. And then, clack! Next thing they knew, those robbers were 20 feet from the cow, laying on their back, rolling around on the ground, groaning. Needless to say, they skedaddled right out of there. That's the end of part 4. Find out what happens next in the Moonicorn, part 5. The Moonicorn, part 5, Homecoming. The next night was a full moon. 1 month had passed since Betsy got her horn. It was supposed to be clear, so Amos had left the cows out again, but in the middle of the night he woke up. He wasn't sure why, and he looked out his window. He couldn't believe what he saw. That wasn't right. Storm clouds on the horizon. There wasn't supposed to be any storm coming. The cows were out. He went outside and he could feel it in the air. Oh yeah, it was a big one. And it was going to happen soon. So he was like, "I gotta get my cows in quick." So he went to the barn doors and he opened them up. Then he saddled his horse and went out to get the cows. So round him up and drive them into the barn. Some of the cows were near the fence. They saw the storm coming, but it was far enough off that some of them were scattered around the field. Well, he drove them into the barn and then he counted them. Only 50? No, 51. Betsy was missing. But where could she be? He jumped on his horse and raced out. You know what he discovered? The back gate was open. It wasn't supposed to be, but it was. She must have gone through there. He went through himself and started looking everywhere for her. Eventually, he found her. She was all the way at the backside of his property, the direction the storm was coming from. She was right up against the fence, looking up at the gathering clouds. He rode up and hopped off his horse and went up to her, and he said, Betsy, what's wrong, old girl? Don't you want to come into the barn? She mooed kind of sadly. Moo. He said, come on, Betsy. It's going to storm. It's not safe for you out here. This is going to be a big one. But she just stood there. And he said it again. Come on, Betsy. And he put a rope around her neck, and then, leading the horse by its reins and her by the rope, he turned and started walking back across the field. It's going to be a long walk this way, but that was all right. Storm clouds were a decent ways off. But just as they started walking back towards the barn, the wind picked up. And it started blowing harder and harder and harder till it was howling. They were only halfway back to the gate by that time, and the storm was racing towards them from the back. They didn't get much further before it hovered over them. And as soon as it was centered over them, blocking out the full moon, the wind died. The storm clouds stopped moving and just hung there. There was no rain, but lightning flashed between the clouds, with booms of rolling thunder. The air started to feel funny, like it was crackling with electricity. Amos was desperate now. Come on, Betsy, come on. But no matter how hard he pulled, she just stood there, looking up at the sky above her. Crackling in the air reached a fever pitch, and lightning struck the ground. It would crack. It was loud and bright and blinding, and it knocked Amos off his feet. He was stunned for a few seconds, and when he struggled to his feet and his vision started to come back, he couldn't believe his eyes. There was Betsy, and right in front of her was a woman. Well, sort of a woman. She had long silver hair, but she was young, or at least looked it. She had a silver dress and silver eyes that sparkled, and coming out of her forehead was a silver horn. She walked up to Betsy, and Betsy walked up to her, and Betsy mooed, moo! And the woman leaned down her head and touched her horn to Betsy's, and she said, There you are, daughter. I found you at last. She didn't actually speak it, didn't actually say it out loud, but Amos, who was just standing there staring wide-eyed, felt that understanding flow into his mind. And they separated, and the woman turned to him, and another understanding came to him. That one day, when she was still a baby, the daughter of the moon spirit fell from the moon. And when she fell to earth, she had to take a form. The moon spirit had been searching for her ever since, but she'd been searching among the humans, among the people. She did not realize her daughter had taken another form. She must have landed in his field, landed in one of his cows. He became pregnant and gave birth to Betsy, the daughter of the moon spirit. The light of the moon that shone through the storm was the moon spirit searching for her. It called to Betsy. That's why she had gone to the top of the hill. And when the lightning struck, it awakened something within her, and she grew her horn. Amos knew the moon spirit's despair at having lost her daughter and the joy of finding her now, and he felt gratitude and thanks towards him for having cared for Betsy and protected her. And Betsy turned away from her mother and looked past him. Amos looked over his shoulder. He saw them now, the other cows gathered just behind him. Betsy walked over to them and nuzzled a few, then she stepped back and faced them all and gave a soft, sad moo. Moo. A moo of love and goodbye. Then she walked over to Amos. She nuzzled his hand, and he gave her a great big hug with tears in his eyes. Goodbye, Betsy, choked. I love you, girl. He looked into her big, silver eyes as he said it, and they reflected her right back at him. She mooed twice. Moo, moo. Sad moos of love and goodbye. Amos knew that Betsy would go now, go home with her mother to play in the quicksilver regolith of the celestial meadows, to bathe in rivers of liquid moonlight and be raised among the stars. And she went and stood by her mother and looked up at her, then back at the other cows, then at Amos, then back at the moon spirit. Betsy nuzzled up to her and mooed 3 times. Moo, moo, moo. Moos of love and joy. In a beam of moonlight, thick like quicksilver, they were gone. And from then on, the moon shined just a little brighter on the Jenkins farm than any other place around. The end.
Thanks for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe.